The morning of my wedding was like something out of a dream. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow on my pristine white gown hanging by the window. Friends and family bustled around the bridal suite, helping with last-minute details, their laughter filling the room. My heart raced, not with nerves, but with excitement. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. As I slipped into my dress, I thought about all the time, love, and energy I had poured into planning this day. Every detail, from the lavender and white floral arrangements to the hand-picked playlist, was meant to reflect the love we shared. My groom, Aaron, had always seemed like the perfect partner, charming, caring, and devoted. Everyone said we were the couple others aspired to be. But as the minutes ticked by, something began to feel off. A bridesmaid whispered in my ear, "Have you heard from Aaron this morning?" I hadn't. The last we spoke was the night before, when he assured me he couldn't wait to marry me. I brushed off the worry, telling myself he was probably just caught up in his own preparations. When the ceremony's start time came and went, whispers rippled through the crowd. Guests shifted in their seats, the tension in the air growing heavier with each passing second. I waited, forcing myself to smile, clutching my bouquet as if it were a lifeline. Then, my maid of honor hurried into the room, her face pale and voice shaky. "He's not here," she said. My heart sank. "What do you mean, he's not here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated before handing me her phone. On the screen was a single text from Aaron. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." For a moment, the world stopped. The walls seemed to close in, the noise of the venue fading to a deafening silence. I read the words again and again, hoping they would change, that this was some cruel prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. He had abandoned me. I stood frozen as the realization hit me. The guests, my family, my friends, all waiting just outside, oblivious to the humiliation I was about to face. The weight of their pity and judgment pressed down on me, threatening to crush me. Someone asked if I wanted to make an announcement, but I couldn't speak. My legs moved on their own as I stumbled out of the bridal suite. I saw the altar, the empty space where Aaron should have been standing, and the sea of faces staring back at me in confusion. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "It's over," before retreating. The day I had dreamed of for years had turned into a nightmare, and I had no idea how to wake up from it. The ride home from the wedding venue was eerily silent. My parents sat on either side of me, their faces etched with worry and disbelief. I clutched the hem of my gown, the pristine white fabric now wrinkled and tainted with humiliation. My phone buzzed relentlessly with messages, concerned texts from friends, curious inquiries from distant relatives, and even some whispers of gossip. I couldn't bring myself to look at them. I couldn't even bring myself to cry. When I finally stepped into my apartment, the reality of it all hit me like a tidal wave. The space was filled with wedding remnants, boxes of unopened gifts, neatly folded wedding invitations, and a table adorned with bride and groom placeholders. It was as if the universe had frozen in time, leaving me alone with the ruins of a future I had meticulously planned. I dropped my bouquet on the counter, its delicate lavender petals scattering across the floor, and sank onto the couch. My chest heaved as the tears I'd been holding back finally broke free. They came in waves, shaking my entire body, each sob heavier than the last. How could he? I whispered into the empty room. Questions swirled in my mind, each more tormenting than the one before. Did he ever love me? Was there someone else? What did I do wrong? The hours dragged on as the day turned to night. At some point, I managed to change out of my wedding gown, folding it carefully as if it still meant something. My heart ached for the life I thought I was about to start, for the love I thought I had. The next few days passed in a haze. I didn't leave the apartment, ignoring the concerned knocks on my door and the persistent calls from family and friends. Every ring of the phone felt like a dagger, a reminder of the humiliation Aaron had left me with. But the worst part wasn't the external pity. It was the internal battle. I began to question everything. Was I not enough? Did I miss the signs? Had I been too blind, too trusting? I combed through every memory of our relationship, searching for clues that might have foretold this betrayal. And slowly, painfully, they began to emerge. The times he had grown distant without explanation, the subtle shifts in his tone when we talked about the future, the way his gaze would sometimes wander as though he was already imagining a life without me. One night, as I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, I made the mistake of opening social media. Photos of what should have been my wedding day had already surfaced, images of the venue, the flowers, and guests laughing, unaware of the disaster that had unfolded. I scrolled further and froze. There he was, Aaron, smiling in a photo taken just days before the wedding, standing beside his friends as if nothing was amiss. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and sorrow. How could he move on so easily? That moment, something inside me shifted. My tears dried, replaced by a slow burning resolve. I realized I couldn't keep letting his actions define me. Aaron had stolen my wedding day, but I refused to let him take any more of my life. I stood up, wiped my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection was a mess, red, puffy eyes and hair that hadn't seen a brush in days. But beneath the disheveled exterior was a woman who had just survived the worst betrayal of her life. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let this heartbreak destroy me. If anything, I would turn it into my greatest strength. The morning after my resolve, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity, as if the weight of my heartbreak had shifted just enough to let a sliver of light through. My apartment, once a shrine to the wedding that never happened, now felt like a battlefield littered with remnants of a love I no longer wanted to cling to. I started by tackling the obvious, the wedding decorations, the unopened gifts, and the gown I had so carefully chosen. Each item felt like it held a piece of my shattered dreams, but instead of breaking me, they fueled my determination. I stood in front of the mirror again, this time with scissors in hand. My long hair, which Aaron had once admired, fell to the floor in soft waves as I chopped it into a short, messy bob. The woman staring back at me was unrecognizable, but that was the point. Then came the hard part, cutting ties. Aaron hadn't reached out since his cryptic text on the wedding day. A part of me had secretly hoped for an apology, an explanation, something that would make sense of his betrayal. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized I didn't need his words to move forward. I blocked his number, deleted our photos, and removed him from every corner of my digital life. It felt like ripping off a bandage, exposing the raw wound beneath. But it also felt liberating, like I was finally taking control. I threw myself into reclaiming my independence, starting with my career. For too long, I had allowed my identity to revolve around Aaron and our future together. Now, it was time to focus on myself. I was an artist, a passion I had put on hold while planning our life. My sketchbooks, once tucked away in the corner of the room, became my refuge. I poured my emotions onto the pages, each stroke of the pencil a step toward healing. At first, my drawings were dark and chaotic, swirling storms and broken figures that mirrored my inner turmoil. But as the weeks passed, the lines softened and color began to seep into my work. I didn't just see the change, I felt it. I also rediscovered things I had forgotten I loved. Late-night walks under the city lights, mornings spent reading in cozy cafes, and spontaneous trips to places I'd always wanted to visit. One afternoon, while cleaning out my apartment, I stumbled across an old journal I had kept in college. Flipping through its pages, I found a list of dreams I had written years ago. Travel to Europe. Learn how to surf. Start my own art studio. It was as if my younger self was reminding me of the life I had once envisioned before Aaron had entered the picture. I sat there for hours, reading and reflecting, and eventually, I wrote a new list. This time, it wasn't just about what I wanted to do. It was about who I wanted to become. Strong, independent, and unapologetically me. I started small, applying for art exhibitions, signing up for yoga classes, and reaching out to friends I had lost touch with. But every step felt like a victory. I didn't just want to survive this heartbreak. I wanted to thrive. I wanted to turn this pain into something meaningful, something that would remind me of my resilience every time I looked back. The path ahead wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was mine. The decision to move forward wasn't a straight path. It was a labyrinth of setbacks and small victories. Some days, I woke up feeling invincible, ready to conquer the world. Other days, I found myself sinking back into the familiar ache of heartbreak, haunted by memories of what could have been. But I had promised myself one thing. I wouldn't give up. I started setting challenges for myself, things that terrified me but also excited me. One of the first was to apply for an international art competition. The theme was resilience, and the moment I saw it, I knew I had to be part of it. My submission was a series of pieces that depicted the stages of heartbreak, from the initial shattering to the quiet rebuilding of oneself. Pouring my emotions into my art became my therapy. Each stroke of the brush felt like a release, each completed piece a reminder of how far I had come. When I received the email confirming that my work had been accepted, I cried, not because of the recognition, but because it felt like the first tangible proof that I was moving forward. But it wasn't just art that was helping me heal. I started journaling again, not about the past, but about the future. Every night, I wrote about the person I wanted to become and the life I wanted to create. I envisioned a version of myself that wasn't defined by anyone else, not Aaron, not the people who pitied me, and not even the lingering doubts in my own mind. One day, I decided to revisit the list of dreams I had found in my old journal. Travel to Europe stood out like a beacon, a promise I had made to myself long before I met Aaron. Without overthinking it, I booked a solo trip to Italy, the country I had always dreamed of exploring. The experience was nothing short of transformative. Wandering the streets of Rome, standing in awe of the Sistine Chapel, and savoring gelato by the Trevi Fountain, all of it felt like a celebration of my freedom. I wasn't running away from my past, I was walking boldly into my future. One evening, while watching the sunset over the Tuscan hills, I realized something profound. I didn't miss Aaron anymore. What I had mourned wasn't the loss of him. It was the loss of who I thought I was with him. But now, sitting under a sky painted in hues of gold and pink, I felt whole again. The trip also brought unexpected connections. At a gallery in Florence, I met a curator who was captivated by my story and my art. She invited me to showcase my work in an upcoming exhibit. The thought of sharing my deeply personal pieces with strangers was terrifying, but I said yes. It was another step toward reclaiming my power. When I returned home, things began to shift even more. My work was gaining attention, and for the first time, I started to feel like I had a voice. But what mattered most wasn't the external success, it was the internal peace I was beginning to find. The girl who had been abandoned at the altar was slowly transforming into a woman who didn't just survive heartbreak, but thrived because of it. I started to see my heartbreak, not as a curse, but as a gift. It had forced me to confront my insecurities, to face the parts of myself I had been neglecting. It had pushed me to rediscover my strength, to build a life that was truly mine. And with every step forward, I realized that I wasn't just healing. I was growing into the person I was always meant to be. Life had begun to feel steady again, like a stream finding its rhythm after a storm. My days were filled with painting, meeting new people, and chasing dreams I had once shelved. But as fate would have it, just when I thought I'd left the past behind, it came knocking, quite literally. One afternoon, while preparing for an upcoming exhibit, I heard an unexpected knock on my door. I opened it, and there he was, Aaron. He looked different. The confident charm he once carried was replaced by something heavier, more subdued. His eyes, once so self-assured, now seemed uncertain as they met mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was deafening, filled with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," he began, his voice low and hesitant. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You're not wrong." He exhaled deeply, as if summoning the courage to continue. "I owe you an apology, for everything. For leaving you that day, for not giving you an explanation, for being a coward." His words hung in the air, but they didn't pierce me like they might have months ago. Instead, I felt an unexpected calm. I had played this scene out in my mind so many times, imagining what I would say if he ever returned. But now that it was happening, I realized I didn't need his apology. I had already moved on. "Why now?" I asked, my tone steady but firm. Aaron hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving. I thought I wasn't ready for marriage, that I didn't deserve you. But the truth is, I was scared. Of commitment, of failure, of not being enough." His confession should have stirred something in me. Anger, sadness, maybe even pity. But all I felt was indifference. He had been a chapter in my life, and that chapter was closed. "You hurt me," I said, meeting his gaze. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I cared about. But you know what? I'm glad you did." Aaron's eyes widened, surprise flickering across his face. "Because it forced me to see my own worth," I continued. "It made me realize that I don't need anyone to complete me. I've built a life I'm proud of, and I wouldn't trade it for anything, not even the marriage we once planned." For the first time, I saw something in Aaron that I hadn't noticed before: regret. Not just for what he had done to me, but for what he had lost in the process. "Do you think we could ever?" he started, but I cut him off. "No," I said firmly. "That door is closed. Whatever we had, it's in the past. I've moved on, Aaron, and I suggest you do the same." With that, I stepped back and closed the door, leaving him standing there. I leaned against it for a moment, letting out a long breath. Seeing him again could have unraveled everything, but instead, it felt like the final piece of closure I didn't know I needed. That evening, I sat in my studio, adding the finishing touches to a new painting. It was a vibrant piece, full of color and light, a stark contrast to the darker work I had created after the heartbreak. As I stood back to admire it, I realized that I wasn't just painting a picture. I was painting my story. And for the first time, it felt like the story was entirely mine. The encounter with Aaron lingered in my mind, but not in the way it once would have. Instead of reopening old wounds, it felt like sealing them shut for good. For the first time, I realized just how far I had come. His apology didn't heal me. I had already done that myself. That realization gave me a renewed sense of purpose. My upcoming art exhibit was just days away, and it felt like the perfect opportunity to showcase not just my work, but my journey. Every piece I had created told a story: heartbreak, resilience, self-discovery, and finally hope. On the night of the exhibit, the gallery was abuzz with activity. People wandered from piece to piece, murmuring appreciatively, their faces lighting up with understanding as they connected with my work. I stood in a corner, watching it all unfold, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. A woman approached me, her expression warm and curious. "Your work is stunning," she said. "It feels so personal, so raw." "It is," I admitted. "Every piece represents a part of my journey. It's a story I needed to tell." She nodded thoughtfully. "Well, it's a story that resonates. You've turned something painful into something powerful." Her words stayed with me for the rest of the evening. It was true. My heartbreak, once a weight I thought I could never carry, had become the foundation of something beautiful. As the gallery emptied and the lights dimmed, I found myself standing in front of the centerpiece of the exhibit, a painting called Rebirth. It depicted a phoenix rising from the ashes, its wings vibrant with shades of gold, red, and orange. For me, it wasn't just a symbol of resilience. It was a reflection of who I had become. That night, as I locked up the gallery and stepped out into the crisp night air, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've survived the worst and come out stronger. The days following the exhibit brought more surprises. My work received attention from not just local collectors, but also a renowned art magazine that wanted to feature my story. The editor called it an inspiring testament to the power of transformation, and for the first time, I felt proud, not just of my art, but of the person I had become. As I welcomed guests, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The woman I was on my wedding day felt like a distant memory. A version of myself who didn't know her worth, who tied her happiness to someone else's actions. Standing in my studio, surrounded by people who believed in me, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the heartbreak itself, but for what it had taught me. A few months later, life surprised me again. I received a message from an old college friend inviting me to speak at a women's empowerment conference. "Your story is exactly what people need to hear," she wrote. At first, I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my forte, and sharing my story so openly felt vulnerable. But then I thought about the countless women who had reached out after my exhibit, telling me how much they resonated with my journey. If my words could help even one person find their strength, it would be worth it. The day of the conference arrived, and as I stood on the stage looking out at the audience, a familiar flicker of doubt crept in. But then I took a deep breath, smiled, and began. "I was abandoned at the altar," I said. my voice steady. And for a long time, I thought that was the end of my story. But what I didn't realize then was that it was just the beginning. I spoke about the pain, the nights spent questioning my worth, and the journey to rebuild myself. I shared how I found strength in my art, how I reclaimed my dreams, and how I turned heartbreak into a catalyst for growth. The room was silent, the audience hanging on to every word. And as I finished, I saw faces light up with understanding, with hope. The applause that followed wasn't just for my story, it was for every person in that room who had faced their own struggles and found their way forward. After the conference, a woman approached me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you," she said. "I'd been stuck in a similar place for years, and hearing your story made me realize it's time to move on." Her words reminded me of why I had chosen to share my journey in the first place. Pain is universal, but so is resilience. As I left the conference, I felt lighter, freer. My life wasn't defined by what Aaron had done to me, it was defined by what I had done for myself. The heartbreak that once threatened to consume me had become the foundation of a life filled with purpose and passion. And as I walked back into my studio that evening, greeted by the warm light of my creative sanctuary, I smiled. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine.